This is a second session that we've done, excuse me, on accessibility. If you go back and you look on our YouTube channel, you'll see one we did about a year ago where the focus was very much on a kind of a real deep dive into all things accessibility, but also adding it to your automated tests and using Ruby as your underlying language to do that. So a slightly different focus this time. We are going to be using WebDriver with JavaScript this time. We'll show you some TypeScript as well, virtually indistinguishable, but we'll show you both options. But there's a focus on what's new in 2.2 now, WCAG 2.2, okay, which arrived fairly recently, slightly later than first expected. But nonetheless, that is now the new standard for WCAG, with impact on single A, double A and triple A variations as well. So this is just a shorter webinar to just kind of bring you up to speed with some of that. Of course, we'll recap some of the things we talked about previously, but the idea is always that you can be up and running. In this case, we're going to be using the Test Evolve Spark framework with Flare for the recording, Spark as the underlying engine for JavaScript and TypeScript, and then Test Evolve Halo for the real-time reporting of those accessibility violations, should you find any, when you're running your tests. All right, so that will be our setup today. As I say, we'll look at what's new in 2.2, not nearly as much as there was when 2.1 arrived, so it's a smaller update, it certainly feels like. And again, as we're doing this, we'll explore what you can expect, what you should be looking to automate by way of accessibility checks, and the things that you can't or you shouldn't. I think we all accept now there's at least 35, 40, 45% of your accessibility testing will still be somewhat manual in nature. All right, that's just a widely accepted kind of ratio, if you like. And then finally, with the kind of tool set we're using today, we'll look at how easy it is to make accessibility testing a regular part of your continuous testing pipeline, as opposed to just making kind of periodic checks and coming back to it 6 months later. Why not do it on a daily, on a weekly basis, every sprint? Start looking at the trends of your accessibility violations and make sure that you are continuously improving and not taking a backward step. So that's what we're going to focus on today. All right, let's get started. Let's take a quick recap about the very basics of accessibility. All right, so just having a clear understanding of what it is. We've talked about this before, but there's some very definite definitions here, right? So essentially, access to the web, the internet, by everybody, regardless of any perceived disability that a person may have. All right, so it's got to be designed to work for everybody, regardless of their system setup, their location, their language skills, or their physical abilities. Things are accessible when you meet that objective of making it available, accessible to that diverse range of people. Okay, and there are different types of disabilities or impairments, of course. Could be audible hearing, motor impairments, movement, and the one we probably most associate with visual impairments maybe, and cognitive abilities, of course. So as any organization designing, building, testing, delivering software and applications for your customers. All right, let's focus here on web apps and web tools. Building in accessibility from the get-go should be very, very high on your list in terms of wanting to deliver high quality products and not excluding people from being able to use those. Okay. That absolutely wants to be very, very high on your list as an organization. All right, so that's what we're talking about for accessibility. Now the focus today is on 2.2. All right, so an international standard. Until recently, we've been focused on 2.1 as the most recent. 2.2 arrived in October of 23 last year. about 6 months late. It was due to be out in around April, May time, I think. So a little later than expected, but it's now out there. In just a second, we'll talk about exactly what it incorporates. As I said earlier, it was a smaller update than 2.1 was. Okay, version 3 is still in draft. That was something that was started in July of last year. And having just looked at the repository myself prior to doing this, it's moving very, very slowly. All right, so there have been minimal updates to the draft throughout 2024 whatsoever. So it's underway, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Okay, so just to refamiliarize you with the kind of the main standards, the big three. Okay, so from a US-centric basis, we talk about Section 508 and ADA. On a more kind of international basis, and certainly probably more so for Europe and the UK, we tend to focus on the WCAG. But there are others as well, not so well known, but they have their part to play. So we have the Equality Act of 2010 in the UK. There's the European Accessibility Act and the adherence to ACT rules as well. So it's not my intention to dive into any of these in real detail right now. The focus for us is on WCAG 2.2, but just be wary, be mindful when you're having conversations around accessibility, and if you're working with a particular customer, consider where they are in the world. Where is your customer? Are they US based with US customers? If you talk about Section 508, it's likely that you're talking about people that have a connection to government function and services that are provided in that way. If you're talking about a customer in the UK with an e-commerce website, your measure for accessibility is highly likely to be the WCAG standards. So be aware that there are different standards that are more regionalized, shall we say. But if you're looking to get started, my advice is going to be focus on WCAG, as that will sit as an international umbrella kind of set of standards and guidelines for anything that you're doing. And in fact, some of these other standards, Section 508, ADA, probably the European Accessibility Act, they probably simply refer to WCAG as its source of truth anyhow. Okay, so let's look at what's come along in 2.2. If we consider what's new in 2.2, as I said, compared to 2.1, 2.2 only brought along 9 additional checks. 2.1 brought along 17 additional checks. 2.2 just brings 9, of which 3 of those 9 are considered necessary for AAA compliance. 4 of the 9 are considered necessary for AA, and 2 of the 9 would be considered single A compliance checks. All right, so 2.2, it was published as a W3C recommendation web standard on the 5th of October 2023. It was expected in April, as we say. In terms of the areas that they sit beneath, if you like, so 3 of those are under the navigable idea. 2 of them are under the input modalities. 1 of them is under the predictability side of things, and 3 of them come under the input assistance category. All right, so let's take a quick step through. They are kind of bunched together. There's definitely a focus on visual impairments and motor impairments with some of these. And with cognitive abilities taken into consideration here as well. So they are kind of grouped together. Let's just take a quick look. So 2.4.11, so this is a navigable item. So focus not obscured. This is considered a minimum type of check under the AA side of things. All right, so we look at the what and the why. So the what is ensure that when an item gets keyboard focus, it is at least partially visible. Okay, why is that? People who can't use a mouse need to see what has the current keyboard focus. All right, so that's a AA check. An enhanced version of that, focus not obscured, enhanced for AAA compliance, so related of course, ensure that when an item gets keyboard focus it is fully visible, so no longer partially but fully visible, for exactly the same reason. People who can't use a mouse need to see what has keyboard focus. Alright, so two flavours of check there, a minimum and an enhanced check. 2.4.13 focus appearance. This is a AAA check, so using a focus indicator of sufficient size and contrast. Okay, and the why, many people can't see small changes in visual appearance, including older people. Alright, so clearly targeting the visual impairment side of things here. But then we move on to more of a motor impairment. Okay, so for people that are not particularly comfy with working with a mouse, for example, so we have the idea of dragging movements, so a click and select and a drag with a mouse. This is a AA check, so for any action that involves dragging, provide a simple pointer alternative. Some people cannot use a mouse to drag items. I think if you probably stop to think about it, we can all think of times when maybe we've needed to do that. And the need for AA compliance is to provide within your application an alternative means for your user to be able to effect the same outcome. All right. Target size. This is a minimum check for a AA compliance. So ensure targets meet a minimum size or have sufficient spacing around them. I think we're essentially talking about buttons and call to actions. Let's think of maybe a checkout button in a commerce website, for example. Some people with physical impairments cannot click small buttons that are close together. You almost wonder if this it doesn't feel like an entirely new check. You'd expect that this was something that previously existed in a standard. Maybe there's an alternative version of it, but certainly new within 2.2. And then we come on to the help side of things. So consistent help. So this is just a single A standard. I guess it's probably just very good practice for any application builder, right? So put help in the same place when it is on multiple pages. Some of these you'd put in the fairly common sense category, I think. Okay. People who need help can find it more easily if it's in the same place on any page that they're on within the application. Okay, moving on. Redundant entry, single A check here. So don't ask for the same information twice in the same session. So some people with cognitive disabilities have difficulty remembering what they entered before. All right, so yeah, an interesting one there. Kind of, you think of that maybe in terms of that entry of a new password and the repetition or the confirmation of that password, for example. And it is. We come on to these next two. It's interesting because some of these authentication methods, capture is the obvious one. It's not particularly congruent with an accessible application. So that in itself is a challenge. People want to make things secure, of course they do, and we're all used to multi-factor authentication now. But it's not very friendly to people with accessibility needs. All right, so yeah, always worth bearing in mind. So let's look at the final two. So accessible authentication. So the minimum standard or check for a AA compliance. So don't make people solve, recall, or transcribe something to log in. Right, and we straight away we think of capture, don't we? Some people with cognitive disabilities cannot solve puzzles, memorize a username and password, or retype one-time passcodes. So straight away you can see the challenge with security and accessibility there. The challenge being to find that middle ground, a way in which solves or works for both parties, if you like. The enhanced version of this, so the AAA for accessible authentication, don't make people recognize objects or user-supplied images and media to log in. Right, this is the typical capture. Okay, what did I see the other the other day? I think I saw a capture. It said simply click on everything that would require petrol, something like that. And of course, it wanted me to click on motorcycles and buses and then there was a kangaroo and a croissant, right? But this is exactly the type of thing. We're all kind of used to it now, but it's no good from an accessibility standpoint. As it says, some people with cognitive disabilities cannot do puzzles, including identifying objects and non-text information that they previously supplied. So this is what 2.2 brings. As we say, 9 checks, fairly evenly split between single, AA and AAA standards. In summary, smaller than 2.1. And as we said earlier, version 3 of the standard is in draft format and still some time away. So not an extensive list of additional checks that you need for your 2.2 compliance, but good to be familiar with them. Okay, so as we start to recap on what we spoke about a year ago in terms of what can and can't, or what should and shouldn't be automated, really what I've done is take some of the additional checks from 2.2 that we've just been through and added them into the green and the red list, what you can and what you can't. And as you will probably deduce from kind of listening to some of those checks, when we talk about things like dragging the mouse, we're talking about focus indicators, contrast, sufficient visual indication, locations of help, etc. You can start to see fairly clearly that you would assume that the majority of those would still need to be manually checked. And certainly with 2.2 that is the case, right? So only one of those 9 from the 2.2 standard makes it onto the possible to automate list, if you like. All right, so that's the one at the bottom there, the target size. So programmatically with tools like Axe and Test-Evolve Spark that uses Axe, you can determine that elements on the page meet that criteria. So that can be automated. It can be made part of your automated checking. The other guys here, keyboard focus, indicator size and contrast, mouse dragging, help location, redundant entry, so not entering the same thing 2 times in a row, and accessible authentication. Again, think capture and variants of capture. Quite understandably, these things, as yet, I say, that may change in time, but right now, with the majority of accessibility tools out there, you cannot add them to the automated testing side of things. So if you're looking to ensure your app is 2.2 compliant, you'll be adding these kind of checks to your manual accessibility testing lists. Okay, so yeah, quite simply in the things that are possible to automate. So yeah, anything that's kind of talking relationships and HTML hierarchy, yes, programmatically that can be checked with an automated tool. When we look at things like ARIA, roles, the states, the properties, validity, relationships, best practices from a coding point of view, that can all be checked. Color contrast is something you might think at first glance that actually, that would require a more of a manual check, but in fact it is something that it's one of the easiest actually to check with an automated tool, with an automated check. And then the one that's usually going to throw up most automated accessibility testing errors are things like the naming of elements on the page, making sure that they have all of the attributes that they should have to allow screen readers and things of that nature to do their job properly. Okay. In the not possible to automate list, we're talking about error identification. We're talking about focus order on the screen, so the way in which, if you continue in that application, you're going to move from section to section. Screen reader testing, of course. These things are just not going to be possible to automate. All right, so that's an updated list with the 2.2 additions there. Okay.